Hello everybody, welcome back. This is the third of a series of presentations thinking about caring, thinking about welfare, and we're reconstructing the history of our modern welfare arrangements. In this video, the Elizabethan roots of our system today, bringing with it fascinating ideas. My title, Setting to Work, is actually a quote. It's a quote from one of the laws passed in that period, and also a fascinating categorization of the deserving and the undeserving poor. It all had its roots in this time. So we're going to examine this period. Recap of last times, we noted that in the Middle Ages, we had a different society. One particular shift that came between the Elizabethan period and the Middle Ages was the Protestant Reformation. In the Catholic period, we had the monasteries that were giving lots of alms, giving lots of support to poor, needy people. So there was that tradition, the monasteries. Now they were dissolved, they were closed in the Reformation period. So one source of help for the poor and the needy disappeared overnight. Moreover, the shift was also in the way in which we thought about alms giving and thought about people needing alms. In the Catholic model, the person asking for alms is a kind of gift to the good Christian. The Christian can have an opportunity to give alms and prove their own Christianity. Gift and therefore give this charity, showing how committed their faith is. And that idea dissipated after the Reformation, and our idea of giving alms became much more a question of managing or administering this support. So the system lost the roots of charity that it had had in the earlier Middle Age period. Good. What we then had was a series of laws regulating how we should do our alms giving. A series of acts was passed regulating the duties of individuals and communities related to poverty, I'm tongue-tied, and related to vagrancy. Vagrancy, I should explain, is working with vagabonds. And these laws we call the Tudor Poor Laws. The last two we sometimes call the Elizabethan Poor Laws. There was a whole series of these acts passed in the time of Queen Elizabeth, the second half of the 16th century. Look at that, 5 laws in total. The laws are really quite distinct because they have a particular view on this work with poor people. They're harsh, hard. The 1563 Act allowed the whipping of able-bodied beggars, which is what's illustrated here in this image from Wikipedia. We had other practices that were sanctioned by the lawmakers: ear boring, burning a hole through the right ear, imprisoning the beggar, and even it was possible to execute the beggars. It wasn't done much in practice for obvious reasons, but it was formally allowed. This was permitted until the end of that century. So my first question for you guys, wow, you thought Brits were nice, but this is really nasty stuff, isn't it? Why was this English response to poverty in this period, why was it so harsh? Pause here and natter with your partner. Well, I'm guessing the idea that you came up with was pragmatic. It had to be. The harshness was a deterrent. A deterrent is if I try to stop you doing something that I don't want you to do. A speed camera is a deterrent, for example. It stops you speeding. For harsh poverty should be a deterrent. You should not let yourself be in a position where you become needy. I think that was part of the logic. It was pragmatic. There was very, very little resources to give help. You maybe didn't have any bread to feed your own family. Why should you give bread to a stranger? So it was really because of the emergency of your own situation, so to say. It's also worth noting these traveling beggars, able-bodied people, would have been considered to be quite dangerous and risky to have. They would come to you, you wouldn't know them, you wouldn't know where they had last been, what had they done in the last place where they asked for help, were they armed, for example? We didn't really know. So there would have been a psychological component. They would have been, fearful figures, and who knows, maybe they were bringing disease as well. So complex reasons for the harshness. We wanted to discourage this begging, especially from people outside of our communities, for practical reasons, but for complex psychological reasons as well. The 1563 Act was notable for a distinction made regarding the nature of the poor people. Poor people in this particular act were not all the same, but rather they could be divided into 2 categories. The deserving poor were separated from the undeserving poor, two separate groups of people. And each group was treated differently. Which kinds of people do you think were in each group? Once again, pause, natter with your partner, make lists. Who might the deserving poor be? Who might the undeserving poor be? What have you got? The deserving poor were older people, the very young, and disabled people. Families in certain circumstances, the only circumstances where their misfortune, not of their own fault, really was clear. The undeserving poor were beggars, those vagabonds, criminals, in particular the migrant poor, so a poor person from outside of our community. My next question for you to pause and think about, how do you find this distinction? This is an Elizabethan distinction. You know, we're going back 4.5 centuries. How do you find it? Does it sound strange today? Does it sound natural today? I don't know what you came up with. I don't know what your feelings were. I think either answer's valid. This is obviously rooted in history and rooted, you know, in the difficulty of surviving in this distant past historical period. On the other hand, I find the idea of separating utterly fascinating. If you look carefully at our modern welfare states, we also have attempts to separate people so that we only give to the needy if we really are sure that they are needy. So in a strange kind of sense, this kind of categorization of people may even find its way into the bureaucracy of our modern welfare states. In particular, acts like means testing. You want to have a particular benefit for poor people, and the state makes sure that you really are poor. So, you know, we check you and we assess you, and maybe we're also making a similar act of categorization. So on the one hand, you know, something from our distant past, on the other hand, strangely familiar to us in the 21st century. The poor, the parish of origin's responsibility. Now, this was a key principle during this period. Poor relief, help for needy people, it was to be given in the parish which the poor person came from. The parish from which the poor person originated. You get the help from your home parish. In other words, travelling beggars were turned away. Why? Why was this? Natter with your partner. What did you come up with? Again, presumably a pragmatic thing. This was simply because of the emergency, you know, of the famine. You know, we had the plague. We had all kinds of life was hard. Life was really, really difficult. We didn't have much to give. We could not afford to give to everybody. So we had to have some way of rationing our resources. And the idea of turning down traveling beggars, that was a basic rationing point. You know, we had to have a gatekeeping system because our help was so limited in its possibilities. The last of these poor laws was the Elizabethan Poor Law, originally from 1601, but it was amended after her time. The 1597 Act, parishes had to appoint an official to administer help, and these officials were overseers of the poor. You know, so your social welfare office worker. This is their historical roots 420 years ago. The last of the poor laws of Elizabeth's time, the Poor Relief Act 1601, it consolidates ideas from earlier acts, you know, it brings together lots of the developments of the half century before it. And it's sometimes known as the Elizabethan Poor Law or the Old Poor Law. What were the provisions? Provision located in and the responsibility of the parish, you know, so your towns, your clusters of villages, they would be responsible for delivering this. So it was very much a local system of poor relief, your local parish, you know, your communa, we might say today. Taxes on parishes to raise funds for two things, the relief that we gave, but also the organisation of labour involved in our poor relief, because it really was a work-based solution. So the parish had to tax its citizens, had to gather money for poor relief for some of our poor, the deserving, but also to organise labour. And that would be costly because you'd have to buy things for the labourers to labour on. The overseers of the poor were to use these funds, to administer these funds. That was their job. there was a focus on, and I used this expression in my heading, setting to work. So those who could work were set to work. They were put to work. They were given work to do. Setting to work for all persons who can work. If you can work, you do, and you only get your alms by earning it through this work. Relief and funds for those not able to work, disabled, older people, and resources to support apprenticeships for poor children, for example, orphans. And the idea was that orphans should be sent out into apprenticeships so that you don't have a kind of generational repetition of poverty, so you can break that cycle. Isn't that fascinating? There you are. So this was the system in place at the end of the Elizabethan period. 420 years ago, but we already have an organized system of poor throughout England. This covers the whole of the country. It's dividing the country into these administrative units, the parish, and each one has the obligation to raise money to finance this poor relief. And the poor relief has two components: work for those who can, poor relief funds, alms for those who can't work. Hope you found this presentation interesting. We'll be moving on into the Victorian period in our next video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your